and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we dive into those fascinating small moments, bold decisions, and unexpected ripples that create waves of change in brands, businesses, leadership, and in life. I'm Laura Barber, founder of The Ripple Impact, a brand strategist who spent over 20 years inside global giants like Coca-Cola, General Mills, and PepsiCo, helping leaders turn human stories into meaningful brand growth. Each week, I sit down with bold thinkers, founders, and what we call our wave maker guests to explore the ripple moments that have shaped their journeys and the lessons you can take to shape yours. Today, I am genuinely excited to welcome Chris Hulatt. Chris is the co-founder of the Octopus Group, which he started back in 2000 with his two fellow co-founders. And what began as a bold leap has grown into a business with over 9 billion in funds under management, investing across renewable energy, real estate, smaller companies, and venture capital. And in 2016, Octopus launched Octopus Energy, now one of the UK's best-known energy brands built on sustainable, fair pricing, and genuine digital, human-first customer service. It's a business that didn't just enter the sector, it reshaped expectations of how that sector could work entirely. Chris was named EY's UK Entrepreneur of the Year in 2017. He's a chartered financial analyst, holds an MA in natural sciences from the University of Cambridge, and is a board member of Hertfordshire's Local Enterprise Partnership. But beyond the titles and the milestones, what really drew me to this conversation is his long-term thinking, his belief in building businesses that genuinely serve people, and focus on legacy over short-term wins. Chris, welcome to the Ripple Impact Show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today.
Hi, Laura. Thanks very much. Really looking forward to it. Thank you for inviting me on.
I'm delighted to have you here. So we love at the Ripple Impact to wind back to the beginning and really learn and get to know the person behind the job, the success, the incredible organization that you and your fellow co-founders have built. Can we wind back to the beginning? And when we first spoke, you talk about being 13 and already knowing that you wanted to go into fund management, reading newspapers that your dad brought home and having this sense of you knew the future you wanted already in those early teenage years. Can you take us back to those moments and what were the big ripple impact moments in your childhood that ultimately created the founder that you are today?
Yeah, maybe there are a couple of things. So certainly it absolutely was the case in my sort of early mid-teenage years. Somehow I started reading the business section of the newspapers. I always looked forward to when my dad came home each night. He commuted up to London and he'd always return every evening with that morning's Financial Times and also the Evening Standard. And I would spend half an hour every evening kind of avidly reading the business section. So I get that is probably a little unusual for a teenager to do. I think, though, for me, that sort of inspiration and interest in business had been sparked by a few years living in Japan from when I was 10 until when I was 13. The family moved out there because of my dad's job. It was a fascinating time to be in Tokyo in the late 1980s. When that country was going through its boom, its stock market was soaring, and just living in the center of a really vibrant city and seeing the kind of commerce going on around me just made me think, well, what is it that helps build an economy like that? How do people make money? How do people build businesses? And I think when we came back to living in the UK, I sort of followed that interest. I was really curious about businesses, and that led me to an interest in the stock market and then to sort of thinking, how could I build a career around that? And it turned out that fund management was the career that was based all around making investment decisions. So for me, that was all sort of in my mind from a pretty young age. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, amazing. And I loved when we first talked, you talked about cutting out the coupons from magazines for your mum to get these amazing brochures sent to the house. And actually, you told me very wonderfully that you have one of those yellow pages framed in your office at home.
Yeah, well, I always thought, it'd be lovely to be able to afford an expensive car. I always used to ask my parents when we saw like friends or neighbors or whatever who looked like they had like a nice BMW or something, I'll be saying, what job does that person do? And that probably started from when I was about 10. And so occasionally I'd fill in the coupon in the newspaper for an advert for like a new Mercedes or something and send it off and these brochures arrive. And then my mom would start being plagued with these phone calls from the dealer saying, we see you filled in the coupon, would you like a test drive? And she'd have to apologize and say it was just her young son dreaming of the future. But, going back to the early days of Octopus, it was kind of everything had shifted onto the internet. So when we were looking for our first investors in the business, and Simon, Guy, and myself set out to try and raise a couple of £1 million to capitalize the business and get it going. This was in early 2000. And we really did resort to the yellow pages. We spent 6 months leafing through it to try and find categories like financial advisors and anyone else we thought might have money and be a potential investor in the business. And we'd call them up and scribble down on each page the feedback we got. And in my house today, near my study, I have a copy of one of these sheets, 25 years on. Really, I see it every day, and it kind of reminds me of where we came from, what we had to go through, how hard it was to get the business up and running, and all of the kind of life lessons that we learned in those early months, which have continued to be a really big part of our personal and corporate culture.
Yeah, that's so incredible. I just love the fact that you have that framed in your office. It's such a beautiful reminder of everything that you guys have done over the last 20, 25 years. So your business, you started when you were 23, right? You and your two fellow co-founders in your lounge with very little money, some savings, and an idea and a vision. You called it this when we first talked, this almost Terminator gene of like just delivering and just going for it. Talk us through the tenacity and the feeling, the experience from sitting in your lounge, the three of you creating this business, and what it's kind of taught you around business and for survival and resilience and tenacity today.
Yeah, well, when we left our previous job where we'd been graduate trainees, everyone told us, you guys are absolutely mad, your idea will never work. And it was a bit of an initial early shock. And then we spent the day sitting around my lounge, and we pretty quickly realized we knew very little about how to start a business. Given we were pretty young, we didn't know that many people. We certainly didn't know many people who could potentially invest in the business. And we didn't know really how we were going to find any clients or generate any revenue. And it was a bit of a kind of deep breath and just figure out, well, what are we going to do? We realized it was going to be a volume game. We had to speak to as many people as possible, pitch our ideas, and try and persuade people that we actually had some semblance of a plan that was worth backing. And that was absolutely the hardest thing we ever did. It taught us so much about the need to never give up. If you spoke to 30 or 40 people in a day and they all told you they had absolutely no interest, that was quite normal. But it was about finding the occasional person who said, that sounds actually really fascinating. Can we meet and talk more? And every time that happened, you realize there are people out there who might think we weren't totally crazy. And for every person who told us they'd shredded our business plan or they had absolutely no interest, once in a blue moon, we'd find someone who did want to back us. And over the course of 9 months, we assembled a group of, you'd call them business angels nowadays. I don't know if that phrase really existed back then. But there were 70 or 80 brave people who wanted to invest anywhere from £3,000 to £300,000 in the company. And that was what got us up and running. But it took thousands and thousands of phone calls. It took 3 of us sitting there every day, having to keep geeing ourselves up to make more calls and do more meetings and take more setback. And that was really why we coined the phrase, the Terminator gene. And it's something we've always said to anyone we know who's setting up a business or any other entrepreneur we've backed or invested in their business. You just have to kind of never give up when everything around you seems really negative. Everyone you know is telling you, oh, are you okay? This is seeming really hard. You just got to back yourself, believe in your idea and keep going. And don't just do 20 calls or 100, speak to as many people as possible.
Yeah, it's amazing. I just love the thought of the three of you sat around making these calls with such a belief and tenacity and passion and something that you really believed in. And, you look back on where you were then and where you are now, and the proof's in the pudding, right? What an incredible organization that you've built. And what really struck me when we talked is that you talked about this idea of really being customer first, and that it didn't really feel like an industry that was doing that. And that was something that was very much heart of your organization, from something that's very technical and bamboozles customers and feels quite cold, arguably, and very regulatory, to something that actually felt customer led.
Yeah, Laurie, you're absolutely right. The financial services industry still today, and definitely 25 years ago, was full of jargon,
Mm,
confusing information, businesses saying one thing and doing something else. I think a real sense to many normal households that you couldn't really ever think that a financial services firm was on your side. You couldn't really believe that they would do the right thing, that they would put you first, they'd look after you as a customer. You tried to talk to, the firm that looked after your investments or your pension or your bank, you'd struggle to understand what they're talking about because they'd hide behind complexity and jargon. It's almost like the
mm,
complexity was a savior because businesses say, well, we're doing things by the book, we're doing things, that our regulator
mm,
wants us to do. Um, but it would really help them make more money out of you. And we thought that just isn't the way to go. We wanted to design products that people could really understand, they could rely on, they could trust, do things slightly differently, and be super accessible. And still to this day, we get emails directly coming to Simon or me from our customers. People can call up and they can speak to someone, a human being who will be friendly, kind, intelligent, and helpful, who will listen to their query and do everything they can to fix it. I think it's about empowering your staff to really care about customers, to think about them, to try and find solutions if something hasn't worked out, and to be really responsive, and not to just give, robotic kind of, no, I can't really help you, or the system won't let me type answers. I think that is partially the culture you build in an organization.
mm.
I think it's partially the sort of beliefs and mindset that you have. And I think it's also down to the people you hire. You've got to hire
Yeah.
people who want to get customers, who want to help them, who have customer service, that right type, those values sort of in their DNA. So you've got to build a business around that. But I think in the end, it's absolutely driven by the kind of leadership and the tone and what people hear around them. If you sit on a team where no one else cares about customers, or no one else wants to try and fix things, or do the right thing, or you get a sense that the chief exec's only motivation is to make as much money for the business as possible, rather than build a business that customers love interacting with, then businesses kind of get what they deserve. For us, we've always taken the view, we want to build a business that we're proud of, that we'd be proud one day to tell our grandchildren about, that is based on trying to do the right thing and based on taking long-term decisions. And you mentioned that in your introduction. And this is absolutely a business that looks out 5, 10, 20 years, not 3 months. And
Yeah.
so that means we're always doing new things or trying things or working on ideas or products that might be successful years down the line. They're certainly not being done because it might make more money in 6 months from now. It takes a while to build new things up, to develop them, to get them to scale. And we've done plenty of things over the years that haven't worked. But we've also found product categories that absolutely have scaled and been successful. And we'll keep looking for those. And you need to encourage everyone in the organization to be a source of ideas and inspiration for that. I think often in businesses, people just sit back and wait for the chief exec to say what the strategy is going to be or what the next thing is. We've always found one of the great strengths of Octopus is having people who are naturally inquisitive, curious, thoughtful sort of people who are always fizzing with ideas. And that makes it a pleasure and a delight every day because you never know what discussion you're going to have with someone that might set us off thinking about something new. But it's about really treasuring that and making clear, good ideas can come from anyone, and they absolutely can come from, and often do, the youngest, most inexperienced people in the building.
Yeah, amazing. I hear like 3 really big lessons in there. One around really being strong on your values and that really going through your organization. 2, create a sense of legacy, of leaving something brilliant behind, not just driving profit. And 3, really hiring people that align to those values, believe in your vision and your mission, and are people that will drive the business forward in a very innovative and a very values-led way. Is that fair? And what other lessons would you add to that?
Yeah, totally. Values, absolutely. I think every business says they have them. They all put them up on posters in the building and things. But my sense has always been, if you asked many people in an average sort of organization, can you tell me the values of your business? They might be able to, they might not. But if you said, this is what your chief exec says the values of this organization are, would they recognize that? Would everyone in the business say the same thing? Would they be able to say, yeah, our behaviors really live up to those values? And I think, sadly, for many businesses, there's just a mismatch there.
Yeah.
legacy to me is really important. We're very lucky that we're a private company. We don't have like large outside controlling shareholders trying to tell us what to do or getting us to focus on short-term things over building a great long-term business. But I also don't really think a legacy is based on how much money you make or how valuable a business is. In 50 years' time, what are people going to want to talk about in relation to Octopus? I hope it would be the impact we had on the sectors we're in, the way we did really fun, engaging, customer-friendly things that made a difference to people's lives, whether it's helping them with their investments and their savings and their pension, or helping them on the energy side, do all of the kind of things that the energy system is now capable of doing, bringing a bit of a smile, great service, and a kind of friendly, engaging, passionate sort of style of business. That's the kind of thing that people will remember. That is the sort of thing we want to be known for and remembered for years down the line. And I think there's so much more that we'd love to achieve in the years and decades ahead. I think it's sad that for many people, you build a business for 5 years and you sell it, and then you kind of never quite know what has become of it. Did it ever fulfill its potential? Did the acquirer do a good job with it, or did it just sort of wither away? And, for Octopus, I think it's very much what can we do ourselves, but also what can all of the great people here do in the years ahead? Can we make a difference to other areas? Can we do things that we're really proud about? That is what kind of legacy and values to me are kind of geared around. And so I think for any entrepreneur, I always encourage people to think, what do you really stand for? What do you want to achieve? What difference can you make? I think if you build a business that has lots of very happy customers, where you're making a difference to their lives in a sector that people care about, then it's likely you'll build a business that's pretty valuable. If every day, though, you simply sit at your desk thinking, how do I make my business valuable? I think you miss out thinking about all of the things that actually are really critical to achieving that. And so you almost get the cart and the horse the wrong way around. Businesses don't just become valuable just because you kind of wish it to happen. They become valuable because you do things that really matter in the long run. And that is how we always think. It's not about building a business that's valuable for its own sake. It's about building a business that really matters and really makes a difference, and that has really happy long-term customers. And then hopefully it will become valuable. And that is important to us. Don't get me wrong. Pretty much everyone who works in the business is a shareholder. It's something we're really proud about. Our share incentive plan has 85% of people take part in it. So people do care about the business, but they think more broadly. And I think that's partially because we've always been very clear. We have a whole bunch of stakeholders that really matter to us. We became a B Corp a few years ago, and I'm really pleased that we see a lot more B Corps around nowadays. Still, probably not as many in the financial services sector as I'd like to see. But I think increasingly when I meet entrepreneurs who I think, oh yeah, you sound like you've got really strong values sort of compass driving you. Often they're aware of the B Corp scheme. They've thought about it. It might be something they're already going to do or they intend to do. I think it's just a good sort of barometer of people's thinking on that front. And for us, certainly, it's something our staff were really delighted we did. I talked to institutions around the world about it as a way of differentiating us and really marking out, we do absolutely think in a different kind of way. And the B Corp status is a sort of proof point of that.
Yeah, fantastic. And it feels just like a really human-led approach. So not just your customers, but also your staff as well. And having these values fundamentally at part of your business so you can have that long-term planning, not just worried about the next week and the next quarter and the profit, but really having a human-led business that is for the long term and leaving that legacy behind, which is so powerful.
Yeah. And I think to do that, you've got to really be very integrated as a business. So we all work in an open plan environment. I can stand up at my desk and see maybe 50 or 100 people. You really do have those interactions just as you walk around the floor, or you're standing by the coffee machine, or people frequently every day will come up to my desk and want to chat about something. Simon, one of the other founders, actually never works at his desk. He just sits in our reception area with his laptop because every day so many people come through reception, not just people who work here, but visitors. And so it's the frequency of lots of little discussions with people that keep you sort of connected with so many people around the organization, but also allow people just to mention little things, or a spark of an idea comes from so many of these discussions. And I think, the idea of shutting ourselves away from the rest of the organization, I think is just it seems that many businesses get to the point where that sort of happens. And you have
Yeah.
management teams or founders who become very dissociated from everyone else in the organization. And I really hope we'll never be that kind of business, because actually a really big part of it is the culture of you're in the building, sat near people. That has to be a fun experience. If
Yeah.
no one gets on, no one likes communicating with their colleagues, then you've got real problems. And for us, we expect people to work hard, you spend a lot of time doing your job. So it's important that you do it with people you like, who you think have a similar sort of passion for it as you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a happy workforce ripples into everything else, doesn't it? It ripples into how things are felt, and you can see when a brand or a business is disconnected and confused. You see it as a customer or as a consumer. So
yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
And I think all too often, particularly in financial services, the thing that I always think is a real problem is it becomes so driven by people thinking, well, how am I going to get paid? What's my bonus going to be? It really drives very individualistic sort of behaviors, because it's all about how do I make sure I appear to my team leader or my boss or the chief exec, whatever, that I can personally claim to have contributed as much as possible. There's no real team ethos if you have a culture that's driven like that. No one's in it. People want to avoid being seen to have had anything go wrong, and also want to just attach themselves to successes. And that's just a very difficult, dangerous kind of culture. Here, I really want people to come forward with new ideas and fresh things. Could we change things? How could we do new things? Could we launch new products? But to have that, you've got to be really careful you don't have a kind of blame culture. People won't want to suggest things if they think the business tries it, doesn't work out, and are then going to get some sort of blame for that. You've got to be really clear. We want to hear your ideas. If we decide to do them and it doesn't work, well, we've made that kind of decision collectively to experiment with a new product or a new fee structure or whatever it might be. So, everyone's in it together. And it's why I think having everyone part of the business, understanding our values, shareholders in the business, there's so many touch points that connect people. So it's not just you rock up, sit at your desk, collect your salary, don't think about it anymore. It's actually I think being in a business which creates more of a sort of sense of feeling and connection is really powerful and really important. I think when I look around at the businesses that are really thriving in the world, the really cool, fast-moving, exciting businesses, the ones that will stand the test of time, I think, be the ones that manage to create that really cohesive kind of workforce.
No, I agree. And I love what you're talking about, because it feels like collective belonging, collective values, collective success, collective innovation, but also collective risk. So it's not my idea and therefore my head's above the parapet. Actually, we're in this together. And if you come up with a great idea and we follow it doesn't work, that's okay, because you've tried, and let's learn, let's go again, let's innovate. So I love that sense and that spirit that you've described.
And I think that constant testing, evolving, trying things, seeing what works, what doesn't, what do people like. We've done that so much over the years, particularly in the early days of Octopus on the fund management side, when we were figuring out how do we launch and market new fund management products? What's the best way of appealing to customers? How do we find them? How do we convince them that this is something that might be a good fit for their needs? And now, more latterly, we've seen that in the energy business as well, which has all been about trying to bring some personality and some life and some values and character into a sector that had really lacked that. And trying to do that in a way that also brings a lot of use of technology too, and harnessing brand and personality and tech all in one, and making that work really well. And going from startup to being the biggest power supplier in a decade means inevitably you try so much along the way, and you have to be willing to try things and see what works, what doesn't, what type of wording resonates with people. Even in the very early days, thinking, well, what color are we going to use? What font? I remember the first time Greg and the guys in the energy business said, we're going to sign off emails with the phrase love and power. And I remember thinking, well, that sounds a bit different. And they were very sure, no, we really think this is going to work. People are going to love it. And they tried it, and sure enough, it worked really well, because for the first time, people were just bringing a bit of spark, something a bit different.
Something human.
If you think back 10, 20 years, your energy bill was this incredibly dull thing that came in the post a couple of times a year with a bit in the bottom to rip off and send a check back. And you had no connection, no understanding. It's full of jargon. You couldn't understand it.
Yeah, and 15 pages of things you just didn't understand.
Yeah, and did you feel any link at all with the business? Whereas now, I think, sectors like energy and finance are so important, so complicated. People need trusted brands that they feel they can really have a link with, that they can rely on to do the right thing for you, and can lead the way in trying to think about customers. And certainly in energy, at a time when power prices has been all over the place and are high, and there's a lot of change going on in the sector, being a brand that people can trust and do more with, I think is going to be super important. And so, I always take a lot of satisfaction and pride and think it's quite incredible that the sort of values we thought 25 years ago might be important as a handful of us sat around trying to get this new business up and running is important today in a business with thousands of people working in the energy business and 7 or 8 million customers. That same kind of thing is as important now as it was back then.
Yeah, that's so incredible. And you talk about marketing and branding and creating stories around the products and a sense of personality and communication and something much more one-on-one than organizational down. Tell us the story of the original inception of the Octopus name, because we have so many listeners and watchers on our podcast who are marketeers at heart. So tell us the original inception of Octopus, because I love this story.
Yeah, this is, it's so hard to name a business. So we spent a lot of time in those first month or two thinking, cracky, what are we going to name it? And if anyone who is a follower of the fund management industry will know there are far too many companies in this sector named after planets or gods or sort of mythical, Greek figures or things like that. You almost have to be like a student of classics to kind of be able to figure out your way around the fund management industry. Or they were named after the founder of the business. And we were very clear that we didn't want to do either of those things. We'd come from a business called Mercury. There was already a Jupiter and a Neptune. Planets were very much out. It was also the end of the that first sort of tech 1990s boom when businesses would call themselves E this and E that, even if they had nothing to do with the internet, because they thought it would give them some higher valuation. And again, we thought that's a crazy trend that's never going to last. And we were very lucky that Simon, one of the other founders, had a friend from uni who worked in marketing at Cathay Pacific in Hong Kong. And he was clearly very, very creative, because one night he sent us this long email saying, I've come up with the idea for the name of your company, and it's based on an animal. And he said, this animal is really cunning, really creative, really imaginative, really flexible, really sophisticated, a long list of descriptions of what this animal was all about. And we read it. And at the bottom, after about 10 or 20 of these things, he said, this animal is an octopus. That's what you should call your business. And we read it and thought, that is absolute genius. By far the best idea we're ever going to come up with. So the next morning, we registered the Octopus Asset Management and Octopus Capital names at Companies House, and that was done. And for many years, though, we were a fund management business, basically, with a growing number of thousands of customers. Financial advisors might know us, some people in the city, people in the stock market circles, and our growing number of tens of thousands of customers. But never did we think that one day we really would have many millions of UK households as customers, a brand that you can't really get on the underground in London without seeing our very colourful adverts. And increasingly now also, whenever people are travelling into countries where the energy business has expanded, I love it when they then send me a photo of something we've seen, like a tram in Milan with the Octopus Energy brand emblazoned all over it, or ads on the metro in Paris or the subway in cities like Tokyo. So seeing this idea that popped into our inbox one day from Simon's mate Ed in Hong Kong has now become a brand that millions of people have heard of is crazy. But also, I think we were very fortunate to pick a name that just is quite memorable, and you sort of just never forget that you've met someone from Octopus. So even in fund management side, when I meet people in insurance companies or pension funds around the world, they're often curious about the name, but they also sometimes say to me, yeah, we met 10 years ago and I've always remembered the name. But it seems to stick with people. And I think maybe my lesson from it is back yourself to have a really distinctive brand. Don't do something too generic or boring. When we set up the energy business, we had lots of people trying to say to us, don't use the Octopus brand.
Yeah, because you were told don't use it on energy, right? You'd be crazy to use it.
Yeah, just stick to that fund manager, come up with a new one for energy. And we nearly went with that. But then one day we thought, actually, no, Octopus is our name. we're going to build a really good business in energy. Greg and his team are going to do an amazing job. And we know they really get customers too. So what are we worried about? Let's back ourselves, trust ourselves, follow your instinct and stick with it. And I'm super glad we did that. If you believe in your brand and your values, then go for it. But don't shy away. Don't have something really anonymous and bland. The Octopus colors, you see all of these sort of pink things everywhere. This really shook up the energy business. It had always been quite sort of dull in many ways. And suddenly you've got a business giving out these pink soft toys everywhere. But they seem to have just become a bit of a kind of legendary concept. They even do OE branded dog toys and things like that apparently super popular.
Your brand's powerful and the merchandise starts. That's absolutely a test of branding.
It is crazy. But I think in the end, you've got to stay true to and never forget. This comes down to you've got to think about customers, you've got to look after them, they've got to enjoy interacting with your business. And you can never forget about that. That always has to be super important. It's how we start all the board meetings is talking about customers. I think a lot of businesses spend their board meetings talking about margins and return on capital, things like that. And for us, that's the kind of stuff that will emerge out of having a business again that people want to interact with or want to be a customer of. They want to believe that you're on their side. And if you do that, then you have a chance of building a big business.
Yeah, amazing. And I've been a customer for many years, so I do see your marketing almost on a daily basis, drops into my inbox or through my app. And I mean this in the biggest compliment. I feel like that you've built a brand that really feels like an FMCG brand. And I mean that deeply complimentary, because in a sector that is so heavily regulated, it feels like Octopus really talks to you and talks with you rather than talks at you. How have you navigated as an organization that tension between creating a brand with personality and tone and style while still in that regulatory world where a lot of it is restricted? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, and we've seen this for 25 years on the financial side where, for many years, Simon would either directly write or certainly be heavily involved in producing all of our marketing material because we realized that tone of voice, how you communicate with people is so important. That is our one chance to get our message across to people in a way that gives them the information they need, explains the risks and the other stuff that they have to be told about rightly, and does so in a way that is sort of engaging and friendly and has a personality to it. And that is a really hard thing to do. We've always found that this is something, if you get it right, it works really well. And if you look at most companies' material, they kind of half do it, or they have a good start, but then they let themselves down by, the small print or something like that. And actually, if you just do it in an honest, fair, open, transparent kind of way, we've done that a lot on the energy business. We've seen prices of people's household bills go up so much over recent years. And Greg and the team, I think, did a brilliant job of thinking, let's be really open with people. Let's try and explain to them what is causing this. Let's not just sort of hide behind it or blame it on, the government. Let's try and give a really proper, clear account of what is going on in the world that's causing this. What are we trying to do about it? How are we working with government? What are things people can do themselves? Giving people lots of advice on how they can maybe reduce their consumption or shift it to cheaper times or things like that. But really be super clear with people. We're never going to sort of hide behind jargon. We're going to try and design things to be as simple and easy to use as possible. We really want the bill to be something you understand, not to just think, oh my God, I have no idea how that number's been created, but I've just got to pay it. And then be really accessible to people when they have questions. So try and have lots of information in blogs or podcasts or on the website, and be very responsive if people get in touch with us. And I think some businesses almost view customers getting in touch with them as like an irritant. You got to deal with it, but you don't really want to. You want to do it as cheaply as possible. You don't mind if people wait half an hour on the phone to get through to you. And again, the data on this is one of the first things we look at in board meetings. And it's something I think the team have done an amazing job of, that having a huge business today, the response times are still fantastic, whether it's phone calls or emails. And they're the same as they were when the business was 100th the size, because unlike a lot of businesses, we've scaled up our ability to look after customers. Because we see that as actually interacting with customers is a strength. That's not something to hate. That's an opportunity to really showcase our values, for someone to speak to an intelligent, helpful human being who maybe has their own personality comes forth. You sort of empower that. You don't try and drill people into this such rigid script that it seems like you may as well be talking to an AI robot for all of the kind of human connection you get from it. I think actually people really, really value all of that human connectivity. They want to talk to someone who can smile and have a joke with them as they sort out their problem.
Yeah, and have that human connection.
Totally.
Yeah, you talk in such a wonderfully passionate way about having such a human-led organization, both for your customers, but also for your staff, and that you have real values and purpose behind your business, which is incredible. At the moment, there feels like there's a lot of narrative in the marketing world in particular that purpose-led businesses and purpose-led marketing doesn't matter so much anymore. What do you feel and think when you hear that? Do you agree? Do you not? What's your position on that?
Yeah, I could see, particularly we see this coming out of the US, the whole kind of Trump era, and the fact I think businesses find it very hard to speak up publicly now for the values that they a few years ago really had when it comes to things like the environment and some of the kind of social issues and so on. I think they just feel browbeaten and they just keep their head below the parapet and they think, one day maybe we'll be able to showcase these things again, but right now it's very hard to talk about your climate change credentials or things like that, certainly in the US. And I think sadly a lot of that has sort of pervaded everywhere else. I think to me, though, it's sort of how you communicate. It's being super clear. We're here for the long term. We're on your side as a customer. Nothing's going to change that. We are on a sort of transition to a different type of energy system. I recognize that brings change, but also brings lots of opportunities too. And I see a big role for us in trying to handhold consumers through that journey, whether they want to be investing in renewable energy on the financial side, whether they want to be leasing an electric vehicle or putting solar panels on their rooftop. The reason, these solutions exist because people like the idea that they can save money by having a bit more control over their power, or by having an electric vehicle they can charge overnight at really cheap rates on their driveway. These are things that most people are doing this not because they're some sort of green evangelical warrior. They're doing it because fundamentally these are better products. And I think actually, sticking to the kind of messaging that these things will save you money, they'll allow you to, heat your home better or whatever it might be, introduction of heat pumps, these things, telling the stories about these things in a very sort of balanced, human kind of way, rather than just purely banging a kind of environmental drum, I think is becoming important. But in the end, I think businesses should stick to their long-term philosophy and perspective. And I think people respect you for that. There are one or two in the fund management industry, very high-profile businesses, which have had huge gyrations. They've gone from being enormous advocates for anything climate change related to suddenly there's a political change and they swing all the way back the other way. And they're now all for oil and gas, and same with like ESG reporting, all this kind of stuff. I don't think people really respect businesses that have these enormous gyrations, who feel like they don't actually stand for anything. They stand for whatever they think might be commercially most opportune for them at that moment in time. Well, people can see through that, and I don't think they really respect it. I think you have to have consistency. I think that's brands and companies that get the strongest links and the most respect and the best sort of connectivity with their stakeholders, I think, are the ones that have a very clear long-term sort of mantra and vision and philosophy, and they're unwavering with that. And people know what they stand for, and they know they can trust it, and that you won't sort of back off the minute that behind the scenes something changes a bit.
Yeah, and it really strikes me that you and your two fellow co-founders very much had this philosophy right at the beginning, so 25 years ago, and maybe the wording's changed and things, but I feel like where you started feels like that really lives out in how you operate today. Is that fair?
Yeah, occasionally I look back at what we wrote at the time, and it was very much about wanting to design products that really worked for the customer. And I think that was born by our experience of seeing the financial services as an industry. It really designed what it thought it could sell rather than what it thought might meet people's needs. And so it was very clear to us there was a gap in the market for a different type of product set, ones that could do something that really worked for people. Our experience had been in the late 1990s, seeing the enormous surge in the valuations of tech companies, not totally dissimilar to what's going on in markets at the moment, and where fund managers who we were working with, who we were sat alongside every day, were saying, we shouldn't be investing more money into these companies. These valuations are insane. And yet the marketing department would be, their view is, well, we can raise loads of money into these products. Of course we should be doing it. And suddenly that was the stance that won out. And so you fast forward a couple of years, people lost a lot of money because it was being deployed into businesses in 1999 at valuations that didn't make any sense. So I think trying to bring a bit more rationality is important. Right now we see valuations in some areas we're involved with, like UK smaller companies, that seem really compelling. Now, it might take a number of years for that to work its way through, but markets have become very polarized around a small number of US-centric, AI-driven stocks. But there's a lot of really interesting opportunities for investors in other parts of the market. I think our job, again, years later, is to try and showcase to people some of these types of opportunities that are out there for them.
Yeah, fantastic. And what's your view of the next generation coming into the workforce? It feels like they're galvanizing us in a whole different way in terms of innovation and thinking. What are you seeing of the next generation coming through?
Yeah, well, I think young people today just go about things in a different kind of way. They are not scared of technology. They work in a different kind of way. I think actually they bring an interesting perspective on work-life balance. I think the days that when I left university, everyone wanted to go and work for a fund manager, an accountancy firm, a consultancy firm, a law firm, or an investment bank, pretty much. That was where almost all of my friends applied for their jobs. And then I think people realized, well, actually, did you ever have any passion to want to go and do any of those jobs? Or did you get attracted to it because you thought it would pay well, or what exactly? And years later, many of them would probably acknowledge it might have been a job that was quite lucrative financially, but did they get real satisfaction? Have they worked really hard and have they enjoyed it? And they might give you a slightly different answer. And I think people now far more want to work for businesses that they can relate to, that share their values. So I think young people now they're really challenging, that they want to use tech in a different kind of way to people who've maybe been in an organization 10 or 20 years already. So that's great, but you've got to figure out how to harness it. I went to give a talk probably about a year ago to some alumni and also some current students at my old college. And afterwards, two of the final year students came up to me, and one of them said, well, me and my friends have already decided that we're only going to be applying for jobs at B Corp. So I'm really glad to hear that Octopus is B Corp. And I thought, wow, I was shocked that there were young people out there who were aware of B Corps and were factoring that into where they were going to apply for jobs. So I think it was just a bit of a reminder to me that actually in the space of a generation, people's perspective on careers and what matters to them and how they want to work has totally changed. Clearly, we now, compared to even 5 years ago, in a far more sort of dynamic workforce where some businesses are very virtual, some are still very office-based, most like us are somewhere in between. And that brings its own opportunities and challenges for like what kind of culture are you creating? How do people learn when they're working remotely? How do they feel integrated into a team? Certainly as a young fund manager, I learned a lot from just being sat in an open plan office surrounded by people who were 5, 10, 20 years more experienced than me, and just listening at how they talked about things or how they spoke on the phone to a company or an analyst or a client or whatever. And I do worry that, capturing that and getting that out of the 2 or 3 days that people are in the office is a bit more of a challenge. And I also think any business, we like to think of ourselves as still a kind of youngish sort of business. But after 25 years, you realize, wow, there are certain things we do in the same way we did 15, 20 years ago. You think, well, what would a 25-year-old today tell us is the best way to go about doing such and such? And I think you've got to reinvent yourself, because otherwise there'll be businesses being launched today that will do things in a totally modern, AI-driven, fast-moving kind of way, and bring today's sort of set of brand values and today's customer needs and use today's technology, and will build the next generation of really interesting businesses. So for any business, remaining relevant, true to yourself, but also not just kind of staying stuck in the past, gets super important. And I think the pace of change is really high. It's very easy for people to do business with new companies. In some sectors, I'm pretty sure if I ask most young people in our building, who do you bank with, they'll use Monzo or Revolut or some of this new breed. And you ask them how many people have a Santander or an HSBC or whatever bank account, and it will be very different to if I ask people in their 40s or 50s in the building. So, sectors do evolve and change. And I think any business that kind of forgets that is going to have problems.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I have so many questions for you. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you're in your lounge with your fellow co-founders starting the business? Like, what advice would you give to those three people knowing what you know now?
Well, I guess it's probably so much in that category. And we've learned huge amounts. I still learn something new every day from discussions with people, or, even the meeting I was in just before this one was talking about a part of the group. This is a sort of newer area for us, and talking to the person who runs that, really fascinating things about how are they growing? How are they going to fit into the changing political landscape? Yeah. So I love that part of the job. And I think the day when you stop learning new things is probably, the day to give up. I hope that never arrives. I suppose we pretty quickly realized you've got to be really bold, trust your instincts, do what you think is the right answer. Don't listen to everyone externally. So when everyone tells you, oh, that's a silly idea, or that'll never work. But when you and your fellow founders are really convinced it's the right thing to do, kind of get on and try it and do it. So believe in yourself until proved otherwise. And then probably the thing that we got wrong a few times, and maybe took too many times to learn our lesson, was when hiring people, really set a high bar. Don't hire people just because they've got some of the kind of technical skills to do the job that you need, but hire people who are going to bring something into the organization, be a positive part of your culture. Don't hire someone who you kind of deep down know is not a great fit, but just because you need a bum on the seat to do a particular job. Every time we've compromised on that, particularly at sort of more senior levels, it's been a disaster, and that person's just not worked out. So I think staying true to hiring people you think, would I happily sit next to that person for 10 hours? So I think they're going to be a source of positivity in the business. Are they a great fit with what you care about as a person, as a business? Only hire them if they do, no matter how brilliant their technical skills and experience might seem to be, because I think this is the number one mistake I think founders sometimes make, is they just rush to hire people who don't have this kind of cohesive sort of thing that gels them together. And then they wonder why they've built a business of a bunch of individuals rather than a really strong team. And you might get away with it for a while, but I don't think it works in the long term. And that has absolutely been our key lesson, that, hiring but you need a kind of harmonious sort of culture where people can work together.
Yeah, I love that. Question for your marketing, right? Because in a tough economic situation, often marketing is the first thing to get cut in a business. What's your view on the value of marketing and what it can do for an organization?
Yeah, I think it's always puzzling. I think this is exactly the problem when businesses are driven by their next 6 months profit is, you sit around the board table and things are tough. You think, maybe if revenue is going to be a bit below, you immediately start to cut cost. And I guess, your short-term marketing spend is an easy thing to pull a bunch of spend on. And I think maybe it gives you the illusion you've done the right thing, because you might then actually hit your expected profit figures. But to me, that just seems totally wrong. And particularly when times are tough, feels like the time to be really investing in talking to your customers, building that link, explaining what is going on. And we really saw that over the last 5 years during some tough times in the wider energy sector. We've kind of doubled down on customer comms. We go out of our way to write really engaging and informative communications. And we've done a lot of promotional work, because I think actually when a sector is going through change is exactly the time when customers need reassurance. They need to know that you're there fighting for them on their side, and that you're not hiding away. And so it's the same with everything customer related. If you make it take twice as long to get through to someone in the call center, or you reduce the interactions you have, or you stop marketing, I think it's just a short-term fallacy that really helps. I think businesses have got to stand up and be counted. And I'd say to anyone, think like, where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years' time? Short-term wobbles in the economy. God knows how many changes to interest rates have there been over the last 25 years? How many different prime ministers or chancellors, or changes in government policy? I think when businesses sometimes say, oh, well, that, red tape's getting in the way of that, or regulation or government policy. These things come and go, they change, they evolve. Yes, you have to sort of operate within it, but don't let that be an all-consuming excuse that you use. Just focus on the things that you can control as a founder, that are in your destiny, and do the best you can. And if you put customers first, you think about them every day, you build products that people want, and you have a workforce of committed, passionate people that you like working with, then I think you've got a chance of succeeding. And just think long term, think positive, be bold, trust yourself, then you've got a chance.
Amazing. That's probably the answer to my final question, but I'll ask it anyway, because we always ask our guests this final question. So we call our guests wave makers because they are making waves on the industry, and that could not be more true of you and your business. What advice would you give to aspiring wave makers?
Set a big, bold, ambitious kind of target that you have no idea how you're going to achieve. Probably our biggest learning in our early years. I remember thinking, oh, maybe next year we can grow by 20%. And we had an amazing chairman who was American who said, well, that's crazy. You should be looking to double every year. And that sort of positive ambition is so important. And Matt used to say to us, of course, you don't know how you're going to do that at the start of the year. That's the whole point. If you knew what you were going to do to hit your target at the start of the year, then that'd be way too easy. You've got to challenge yourself to have to do new things, invent new ways of finding customers, new ways of growing the business. It's only by having that big ambition that you really maximize your potential. And that is absolutely how I think you'd make waves and really shake things up.
Amazing. Chris Hulatt, thank you so much for taking us behind the scenes of your journeys, from reading the business newspapers, cutting out the coupons in magazines, to setting up a business when you were 23 to 25 years later, 9 billion under management is an incredible journey. So thank you so much for talking us through your journey, the values that sit at the heart of your business and the legacy that you are creating. And your story is such a reminder that ripples aren't always loud. Sometimes they are patient, they are principled, they are values driven, and they are deeply human for your staff, but also for your customers. So thank you so much for today.
No, absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. For everyone listening and YouTube watching, keep thinking long term, play the sustainability game, stay human in your decisions, and never underestimate the ripple impact of small moments, but done with real intent. And if you're looking to elevate the human storytelling of your brand, please get in touch with us at The Ripple Impact so we can see how we can help your business. That is the wrap on this Ripple episode. Tune in weekly for more bold voices and inspiring wave-making guests just like Chris. I'm Laura Barber. This is The Ripple Impact. We will see you all next week. Chris, thank you so much. For everyone else, bye for now.